This is when you come up and there aren't really words to fully capture what was being shared. So thank you so much, Shanira, for your powerful voice. We also want to thank Donnell for being here visiting us again. Excited to have him. And where's Macy at? Macy is back visiting. So excited to have Macy back today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm the lead pastor of the Law Faiths community. We are a progressive Christian community that strives to follow Jesus' spiritual path of radical compassion by being unapologetically inclusive, by being conversation-oriented, and by teaching theologies that promote the flourishing of all life. And so for us, this means that all people are welcome in this space, regardless of race, regardless of sexual orientation or gender, regardless of class status or belief or unbelief. We want people to know that they are welcome in this space, but also we want them to cultivate a sense of belonging in this space. And to that end, we are still working through our sermon series, Better Together. And this series is really about addressing some of the, what I believe one of the underlying issues of many things that are happening in our in our society right now, particularly within politics, but also just in our lives, is really addressing loneliness. Now, loneliness is understood as a subjective feeling that you are lacking the social connections that you need. And so in this sense, loneliness can feel like being stranded or cut off from the people with whom you belong. Even if you are surrounded by other people, you can find yourself still feeling lonely. And for those of us who struggle with loneliness, the obvious solution, some people might tell us, is that we need to go spend time with people, or we need to go just make some friends. But we know it's not quite that easy. And I think specifically today, one question I was left with as I was preparing this sermon series, I know I was going to talk about this, is what does it mean to be someone's friend? Like really, what does that mean to us? And how might friendship expand our experience of the sacred? Now, as human beings, we know we all need the social connection of friendship. That's one of the reasons that we were able to evolve as such. It's one of the reasons we've been able to prevent ourselves from becoming lonely. But we know, again, that making friends is not easy. Keeping friends is not easy. However, what we'll see in the passages that we're going to read and discuss today is this friendship that exists between David and Jonathan and Jesus and his disciples. That friendship, in so many ways, is essential for our spiritual growth, essential for our both physical and emotional well-being. Before we do too much with that, I want us to spend a few minutes just doing something we call community care, where we just greet one another, say hello, maybe get some coffee if you have a chance to get any, and do the work of becoming more than just Sunday friends. So just a couple of minutes, we'll do that, and then we'll transition back into worship.
All right, the first scripture today is from 1 Samuel, the 18th chapter, 1st through the 5th verse. As soon as David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan's life became bound up with David's life, and Jonathan loved David as much as himself. From that point forward, Saul kept David in his service and wouldn't allow him to return to his father's household. And Jonathan and David made a covenant together because Jonathan loved David as much as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his armor, as well as his sword, his bow, and his belt. David went out and was successful in every mission Saul sent him to do. So Saul placed him in charge of the soldiers, and this pleased all the troops as well as Saul's servants.
The title of today's sermon is Friendship as Spiritual Practice. And I picked that title very intentionally because as I began to sit down and craft and read all the kinds of things that I knew were going to inform my talk today, I kept coming back to this idea of contemplative practices and the ways in which the art of being a friend felt so parallel. Now, spiritual practices, they are activities that you do to deepen your relationship to the divine. That's how we would historically define them. And they also deepen our relationship to the world around us. That's why a lot of us do spiritual practice. We go hiking, or if we're more of a nature person, or even just in the space you actively are. You find yourself feeling deeply connected to yourself and connected to the sacred. Practices of this sort help us learn how to listen to what we called last week the sound of our genuine. And so in this sense, to say that friendship is a spiritual practice is to suggest that the act of making friends and maintaining friendships not only deepens our connections to ourselves, but also, in fact, deepens our connections with the divine. Now, according to Dr. Vivek Murthy, there are 3 categories of friendship. If you could put the slide up here real quick. He notes that we need close friends and intimate confidants with whom we share deep bonds of mutual affection and trust. We need casual friends and social relationships that offer shared support and connection. And we need to belong to communities of people with whom we experience a sense of collective purpose and identity. And in this way, the way we think about these kind of circles of friends or layers of friendship is really, they correlate with kind of the 3 dimensions of loneliness that I haven't explicitly identified, but what we've been talking about throughout this entire series. An intimate, a relational, and collective. In these ways, we can understand the kind of relationship we're looking for when we feel lonely. So for those of us who are struggling with a kind of intimate loneliness, we have a desire for a significant other or even a deep friendship with someone else, someone that you can trust. Relational loneliness is a desire for social friendships, but friendships that still have meanings and purpose. Similarly, with this notion of collective loneliness, might be a hunger for a community of people who have a similar sense of purpose. But friendships can be, and for some of us are, challenging work. Work that no longer comes naturally to us as it did when we were children, right? And you just kind of threw us all in a room and people learned how to make friends for the most part. And I wondered why that is the case, right? You know, for those of you who don't know, I live right across the street from Westwood Charter Elementary School, and so I see kids playing every day, right? That's Stephanie just talking about all the time, like literally all the time. Like I see in my yard, and I see the way in which they engage with each other, how they laugh, how they run around, how they might hurt each other, and how they make up. And I see this way in which they are able to connect with each other, and I wonder what happens along the way where we sometimes lose the capacity to do that, or we lose that kind of connection. A few things came to my mind, and I think one of them is fear. Often when we're kids, we don't really know we don't have the kind of fear, for the most part, of rejection in the same way. We're able to just try to be someone's friend. If they don't like us, we try to be someone else's friend. We can kind of go from person to person till we find our people. That kind of lack of fear requires a certain kind of vulnerability, which I think we may struggle with as adults as well. Being a friend means being open with someone and being honest about how we feel. But also, I think particularly in Los Angeles, I think context matters too, right? So many of us are trying to develop relationships where it's a complicated context. There is perhaps a risk involved because we are crossing some kind of boundaries. Maybe it's a gender boundary or a racial boundary or a class boundary, or perhaps it's a complicated relationship because of work. And sometimes when you think about all the kinds of rules you might have in your head for how you're supposed to navigate this relationship, it's just easier to avoid doing it altogether because you realize it's just going to be so complicated. Or maybe I'm just the person who has all the rules about friendship and what that looks like. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. Context, I believe, is actually what makes Jonathan and David's relationship interesting and what makes it, I think, challenging and ultimately what makes it complicated. And in a sense, it does also reveal the depth of love they have for each other. So as we read in chapter 18, it begins, I should say, chapter 18, before we get to chapter 18, it's right before, in the preceding chapter, David has just slain Goliath. So he's just done his big thing. He's the hero for his people, and they're cheering him on, and everybody just loves him because obviously he just helped defeat the Philistine army who had been trying to encroach on their territory, at least as they would tell the story. And so at this moment, he gets brought to King Saul to have this kind of hero's welcome, to be like, hey, this is this person who's done this great thing. Let's welcome him. Let's shower him with our love. And in fact, that is what happened. The text doesn't say exactly why, and it reads as though it was their first time meeting, but for some reason, there is this immediate connection between Jonathan and David. Just immediate connection. They just knew that they were going to be friends, or at least Jonathan knew. And they make a covenant together, a covenant that is bonded first on the love that Jonathan has for David, but also ultimately the love they have for each other. We read in verse 1, it says, Jonathan's life became bound up with David's life, bound up with his life. Verse 3 says, Jonathan loved David as much as he loved himself. And so I was wondering, what does it mean to say when you say something like your life is bound up with someone else, bound up with a friend? The Hebrew translation for the word we use as bound up is soul. So the writer is trying to express this idea that Jonathan's soul felt tied to David's. And what I suspect this means is that there's a way in which Jonathan cared about his physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. It was deeper than just what we might call a casual relationship. It was not transactional. He wasn't giving something with the expectation that he would receive something. And so in this way, I could say perhaps that the first spiritual practice of friendship is mutual reciprocity, right? Helping the other person see their humanity in the moments when they forget it, or the moments when they are even, unfortunately, the victims of dehumanization. There's a way in which Jonathan is reminding David of the work he has done and showing him that he loves him. And yet what we see further on, there will be moments when there's a brutal honesty they have to have with one another that is deeply difficult. Because it is important for us in the relationships that we have to have someone around that can be honest with us and tell us what we actually feel. You see, because all too often what the world does to us, we begin to do to ourselves. All too often what the world says about us, we begin to say about ourselves. And so growing up, I heard if you're taught, you're a black person, or even just anyone, you're taught that whiteness is good, then you begin to believe it. You don't explicitly say it, but you begin to be implicitly believe that there's something about whiteness and about being white that's inherently good. If you're taught that blackness is dangerous, you begin to internally believe it, that there's something about the way people are when they are racially identified as black that is dangerous. You begin to internalize this idea, these beliefs around disability, perhaps that disabled bodies are not full human beings, that something is fundamentally wrong with them. You've internalized this idea, perhaps, that poor people are lazy, and that's why they are poor. Because we've heard the world say it to us, and we begin to say it to ourselves. And so I asked myself, well, what does it mean for whiteness to be good as a black person? Does that mean I need to perform whiteness? Does it mean I need to put more extra effort into making sure people don't believe that I am dangerous? Does it mean that I, as a person who's straight and cisgender, can't have a friend that is queer because of how people might think about me? Or what does it mean to stand in front of you and recognize and claim that I have a disability? There's a way in which we have to learn how to break out of the narratives and the messages that surround us that we hear all the time, to figure out who we are and to become ourselves. And this is not an easy task. This is not something that anyone can do necessarily on their own. And so when you see this week when Kamala Harris is responding to this notion, this call out that women need to have babies to be kept humble, it is with perhaps great pride she could look into the camera and say, you know what, the world needs to know that some of us ain't trying to be humble. And you need someone to help you see that within yourself. And this is what true friendship is. It is when someone can critique you or say something about you that belittles you or doesn't reflect your full humanity, and you have someone else to actually say, no, actually, that is not the case. You are not dangerous. You can love who you want to love. You are a full human being besides and despite whatever disability you may have. We recognize there are systems in place that perhaps are keeping you poor, and in fact, there's no need to believe that women need to be humble by having children. In this way, another spiritual practice of friendship asks us not to fall prey to the lie that a good friend only tells us what we want to hear. Instead, true friendship asks us to be brave enough to tell our friends what they may need to hear and what no one else may be willing to tell them. This is not easy, because it also requires us as friends to be grounded enough to hear what our friends are telling us, and not to be reactive and blame them for what is going on within us. The capacity to be honest with each other is what leads us and helps us to grow. This is actually what we see in the case of Jonathan and David. When we move on to chapter 20, it tells the story of the last time these friends would be together. Because as David continues to become more and more popular and gather more and more acclaim, Saul becomes jealous of David, and he wants to kill David. He doesn't want David. He feels like David is a threat to his power and to his throne. And so David realizes this. He uncovers this plot, and he has to tell his best friend, he has to tell Jonathan that his father is trying to kill him. He has to tell him, and he has to hope that he will believe him and that he would actually be willing to choose a friend over family. And I think one thing that we see in this story, one thing that we can learn, is that despite how comforting and healing our friendships might be, and they need to be comfort and they need to be healing, they are rarely free of conflict and tension. Even within the best of friendships, there will be conflict and there will be tension. You see, because we can become angry and disappointed in our friends, and they can become angry and disappointed in us because we are so emotionally invested in each other. We are so deeply emotionally invested in each other. And so a second spiritual practice that we can recognize as a part of what it means to be someone's friend is the spiritual practice of normalizing repair. Of normalizing repair. Of recognizing when we have transgressed or hurt someone, or recognizing we are sharing news with someone that is painful, and to do the work of healing. And to know that this is a normal process of what it means to be in a relationship. And to do this requires being vulnerable. It requires being honest with ourselves. It requires opening up to our friends in ways that perhaps may initially feel uncomfortable because we've not shared like that with anyone outside of our own consciousness. True friendship, the kind that can prevent us from struggling with loneliness, asks us to be vulnerable in ways that cause us to grow. But this kind of growth is not comfortable, it is just necessary. This kind of growth is not comfortable, but it is necessary for our spiritual maturity to learn how to be honest and to confront the truth of who we are. And this is a part of what friendships can be in addition to loving relationships. And so for Jonathan and David, this growth meant that they had to agree that they could no longer see each other. Because, in fact, Jonathan discovered that David was telling the truth. That David was telling the truth about his father. And so what we see at the end of chapter 20 is we read this heartfelt goodbye, this sad goodbye, where they're both holding each other and weeping and where they kiss. And I wondered, when is the last time you cried with a friend? When is the last time you felt close enough to someone to call them because you just needed to cry? You needed someone to cry with. I think this speaks to the nature of vulnerability, the ways in which we are invited to transgress those boundaries that we can create about how open we are with someone who is not our significant other, someone who stands outside of that intimate circle, but yet still within the intimacy of closeness. You see, even though they would never see each other again, the love that connected them endured. And at the beginning of 2 Samuel, David mourns. He mourns Jonathan and Saul's death as they had died in military combat. He carried that for the rest of his life. And so what we see in the story of Jonathan and David, and perhaps what we have experienced in our own lives, is that relationships that develop a degree of intimacy are sacred. They are sacred. And they help us grow in love of neighbor, of self, and reveal to us a bit of what it means to grow in love with the divine. And so I think it's important for us to spend a few minutes thinking on this question about friendships. And so I invite you to spend a few moments reflecting on your relationship with whoever you might believe to be your best friend is outside of your spouse or your partner, right? What are one or two things that you love about them? What are one or two things that you love about them? Why are those things important to your friendship with them? Let's practice naming what it is that it's inside of us that's bound us to these people whom we love. Let's spend a few minutes in conversation with that, and then we will move on with worship. This is the time in our service where we invite you to be in an attitude of prayer. And to do that, we have a few prayer stations around the space that we invite you to use. We have a kneeler over under the Pride Progress flag, if you feel so moved to kneel and pray. We have a candle lighting station, and perhaps you want to light a candle as a means of prayerful intention. Or we have a wailing wall for you to write and record whatever prayer you might need to have there as well. The space is open for you to use.
I invite you to join me in an attitude of prayer. God who holds us steady. Lord, all too often we wear masks that allow us to drift in and out of our counterfeit selves, depending on who we are in proximity to. There are days when we feel so disconnected from ourselves that we wonder if anything is real at all. Lord, turn us toward the parts of us that are true. Give us the courage to disentangle ourselves from our masks. Keep us from demonizing our false selves, Lord, by helping us hold these masks in compassionate care. Because we know that every mask is the result of an unhealed wound. Take us on a closer walk with you as we explore the parts of our inner worlds that we have hesitated to go. And on this journey, may we listen for the sound of your name, and may we hear the sound of our genuine. Amen.
Good morning. I'm Owen. I'm a member here at the church. I'm also a friend. I'm the type of friend that will help you move. So just in case you needed a friend, I'll help the guy. I'll be the guy. You got to buy lunch though. So some announcements today. We are. If the first thing is just the newsletter. If you got the newsletter, great. If you haven't, let's click on some links. There's a little QR code on each table. Do that, or go to loftla.org/signup. Also today, right after church at 12:15, is a voter engagement event. LA Voice and Westwoods Community Organizing Cohort will be hosting a workshop in the Wesley Room. That's just downstairs. Come by and hear about local ballot measures, voting for the love of our neighbors, and how you can use your vote to pursue a more loving Los Angeles for all people. That sounds good. And then on Wednesday, the men's group is meeting. The men's group, you do not have to be a father to go to the men's group. You don't have to be a husband to go to the men's group. You don't even have to have an opinion on your favorite Fast and Furious movie. You don't have to have all those things. It does help. But if you just want to come to the men's group, please do. There's a lot of people there who are just like you and looking to get plugged in and talk to people. Tom over there is a pretty consistent goer. He can tell you more about it in the blue shirt right here on the couch. Whoa. Looks like Thursday, Fast 5 is definitely on the agenda then. Okay. Which is the best Fast and Furious? Debate me. Okay, here we go. Wednesday, October 18th at 8 p.m. Okay, guys, this is it. This is why we do this. This is why we do this. When Wesley talks, nobody talks back to Wesley. I just wanted to highlight that, okay? I know. He's going to hear about this. He's going to know what's coming. Okay, next week is the Fall Festival. If you've never been to a Fall Festival here, enjoy next week because it's going to be awesome. There's a chili cook-off. You can actually enter and cook a chili and share it with everybody, which is a lot of fun. But there's also games and fun things for kids to do. It's very fun. Come. It's right after the Loft. I can't speak highly enough about the Fall Festival. Anybody want to raise their hand to tell more people about the Fall Festival after the service? Okay, this gentleman over here. Okay. If you have questions, go to him. He'll tell you more about the Fall Festival. Okay. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Owen, for that. This scripture today, and I'm glad Dr. Carter pulled this. This is from the First Nations version. And this is John 15, 9 through 17. And this is actually one of my favorite scriptures. In the same way the Father loves me, I have loved you. Never stop walking this road of love. By doing what the Father has told me, I have remained in his love. As you walk in my ways, my love will remain in you. I am saying this so your hearts will be filled with the same joy I have. To walk the road with me, you must love each other in the same way I have loved you. There is no greater way to show love to friends than to die in their place. You are my friends if you walk in my ways and do what I say. I no longer see you as my servants, but as friends. Masters do not share their hearts and plans with their servants, but I have shown you everything I have learned from my Father. You may think you choose me, but I am the one who chose you. You are my new garden where I will grow a great harvest of my love, the fruit that remains. When you bear this fruit, you represent who I am, my name. Then the Father will give you whatever you ask for. I am telling you this so you will walk the road of love with each other.
For the previous conversation question, I'd asked you to spend a few moments reflecting on your relationship with your best friend and thinking of one or two things that you love about them and why those things are important to your friendship with them. And now what I want to invite you to do, not now, but perhaps after worship, is to tell them, to text them, to call them, whatever way in which you are, your favorite medium of communication might be, to tell them that you love them. Take the time to open up and remind them and let them know how you actually feel about them. This is one of the practices, what it means to be vulnerable, honest, open, and loving with one another. Now, as Alex said, I use the First Nations translation for this passage because I really think it captures the importance of community in a way that is often lost in other translations, because indigenous cultures, in some ways, I think, mirror the culture that Jesus himself grew up in. Much more communal-based, much more focused on the importance of gathering together as a way to experience the divine. Now, earlier I had mentioned three dimensions of loneliness: intimate, relational, and collective. Now, relational and collective loneliness can be addressed, if you will, by cultivating more meaningful relationships at your work or in your neighborhood or in your religious community. And in this sense, I think this translation helps us understand how this collectiveness is key to experiencing the kind of intimacy that can help us prevent us from being lonely. So in the Gospel of John, we read that as Jesus prepares his disciples for what he knows will be his death, he reminds them that they are not just his students, not just his servants, but they are, in fact, his friends. He tells them this as they have gathered for Passover. This is the last night that he's with them before he is crucified. Now, the word that we translate as friend in this passage in verses 13 to 15 is in Greek, it's pronounced philos. And as you might have guessed, it's a derivative of the word phileo, which we know means to love. And so in this sense, it is crucial for us to understand that when Jesus speaks of friends here, when he calls his disciples, those around him, as his friends, he is really saying those who are loved. Those who are around me, you are loved. And so in this sense, the English noun friend doesn't really fully convey the presence of love that undergirds the Johannine notion of friendship. Because even in the best circumstances, we might believe that and think of friendship just as deep emotional investment in someone. Like, I really care about this person. But the loving friendship that the writer of John is describing is more than deep emotional investment. It's more than that, because history has shown us that deep emotional investment is not enough to sustain relationships when we are going through the worst of times. And this is what the followers of Jesus were getting ready to go through. Indeed, what we see in this passage is that as Jesus is preparing his followers to continue the work that God has called him to do after he is crucified, Jesus is reminding them that the only way they can call people into community is by walking the road of love. Love, in this sense, love is best understood as the will to extend ourselves for the purpose of nurturing our own or another's spiritual growth. Love is an act of the will. Love requires right intention. We have to have the right intentions if we are engaging someone. We have to pay attention to the truth of who that person we claim to love actually is, to listen for the sound of their genuine, and that love should always result in compassionate actions that uplift the personhood of those whom we claim to love. This is the kind of love, as it says in verse 13, where you are willing to put someone else's life, someone else's well-being ahead of your own. We might naturally understand this as the love of a parent to a child, or a love of just that we might have to the children in our family, those who we have grown close to. There's just natural inevitability of loving them. Or perhaps it is that kind of love that informs those public servants, those who are in the military, those who are firefighters, those who go and do dangerous work to the service of others. Or perhaps it's the kind of love that informs politicians who actually go in and represent the interests of their community. Those politicians perhaps are motivated by a true love. Perhaps the best example of this kind of love we might find today is in the relief and medical professionals who go into war-torn communities like we are seeing in Gaza. Only love could motivate someone to do something like that, to put themselves in harm's way for people they don't know because they believe it is the right and loving thing to do. For Jesus, the strength and enduring legacy of the community he has founded is that we are to be the kind of friends with each other that actually love one another, and that our love for each other will keep us safe. He believed it would keep his community safe. He believed that their love for each other actually would help them grow. This is why earlier in chapter 15, he uses the metaphor of being the true vine and his followers being the branches. In the same way that a branch is only as strong as the tree it is attached to, our strength and capacity to grow as a community is found in being rooted in the spiritual path of radical compassion that is the religion of Jesus. In following this path, we are connected to the sacred, and the sacred is connected to us. There is a divine interrelationship, a mutual accountability we find in those loving relationships. And so to live as the branches of the true vine is to be shaped by the love of Christ. To live as branches is to be subsumed into the communal work of bearing fruit, of living in love. Now, the essence of what Jesus is calling his disciples to do, what is calling us to do, I believe, in this passage as followers of the religion of Jesus, is to bear fruit. And fruit, for Jesus in this passage, is best expressed as friendship. It is best expressed as friendship, a friendship that finds its foundation in love. And in this way, I wonder, perhaps we could say, if the whole point. I wonder if we could say the whole point of following Jesus' spiritual path of radical compassion, the whole point of following this religion of Jesus is to expand our community of friends, to expand our relationships, to continue to grow in love of others, to have more friends. But not in the friends in the way in the English sense, but friends who we grow to know. Friends that we grow to see as full human beings, and friends that we grow to love. Maybe this is, in fact, a better way to interpret the Great Commission that we read in Matthew. Maybe this had been the best way to interpret it the whole time. How might we change what it means to practice Christianity if we understood the central goal of our faith tradition was to learn how to make real and lasting friendships grounded in love? How might that change what we think it means to even be a Christian if the goal of what we're all trying to do is actually learn how to be friends with each other, to expand our notion of friendship that moves us to love each other in ways that moves us towards a collective sense of community, a beloved community. I don't know about you, but this commission, this mission, if you will, feels right for me. And so I'd like to leave you with this, discussing this question. One of the ways that we stave off relational and collective loneliness is to develop relationships with people who have a shared sense of purpose. And I'm wondering what about us, what we're doing here in this space? From your perspective, what do you think is the shared purpose of the Loft? And what do you think the purpose should be? Now, I ask this intentionally, and I want you to know that I'm asking you to, the Menti code on here is an invitation for you to submit your answers. You know, all you have to do is go to menti.com and put in that code, and you'll be able to tell me what you think. Just know that I don't know who submits what answer, so I can't, figure it out and email you and be like, why do you think this is the purpose? That's not what I'm trying to do. It really is to just get a sense of what you think the purpose of this space is. How might we best come together collectively and deepen our shared sense of purpose as a community of faith, as followers of this religion of Jesus? So spend a few minutes in conversation, then we'll wrap up worship with song and a children's moment.
We are learning how to be friends of God too. And can you tell us about what we talked about today?
Rich people, they care about more of their stuff instead of God.
They love stuff instead of God. And not necessarily rich people, it can be other people too. And can you tell about what experiments that we did?
So we did some things that were supposed to seem impossible. First, we tried to get a straw and poke it through a whole hard potato. And there's a strategy. You just had to do that and stab it in really fast. And then the second activity, we had 2 boxes and then 2 pieces of paper. And we had to try to get like $1 of pennies to stay on the bridge.
So it looked impossible, but it was actually possible. And with God, all things are possible. Right, well done. Okay. Thank you.
I want to encourage you, as we've been discussing this today. I know we had talked about friends and the importance of community and what it might mean to grow in love together as community. If you're not a part of a group that we have here, I invite you to consider joining one. Also know that we are in the process of creating a few new groups, short-term things. One's gonna be around a book. We're trying to figure out some other stuff. If you have an idea for a collective group that you might wanna host or be involved, not necessarily host, even be involved in, or think it's something important to have, feel free to let me or Wesley know. We really wanna be the conduit to actually to do the work of, again, becoming more than just Sunday friends. We think that's something that's so important to this space and something that we're trying to figure out how we can best do that. Receive the benediction. Now, there is something in everybody that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in other people. And yet, we know that it is not easy. We know it'd be easier for us to say that anyone who behaves as this person behaves or says something as foolish as the other person says, there simply can't be any sound of the genuine in them. Yes, even for those people, those who say and do foolish things, we must wait and listen for the sound of the genuine even in them. We must wait. For if we do not wait and we cannot hear it, then in our worldview, they are not even present. They do not even exist. And everyone, every being deserves to feel that people know that they are in fact alive, that they are in fact present. So as I live my own life, this is what I'm trying to fulfill. It doesn't matter what it is I'm doing. I know who I am. I am secure in who I am because I have learned to hear the sound of the genuine in myself. And having learned to listen to that, I have become quiet enough at times, and still enough at times to hear the sound of the genuine in you. Now, if I hear the sound of the genuine in me, and if you can hear the sound of the genuine in you, it is possible for me to go into my own spirit and to come up and see myself through your eyes. And it's possible for you to come into my spirit and see yourself through my eyes. And having made that pilgrimage, we see the world anew. We see something in ourselves that we had not otherwise seen. The walls that divide us disappear, and we become one, because the sound of the genuine we are making together produces this music, this harmony, this concert of love. May the grace of God go with you as you leave this place. May you find love flowing through you as we see modeled in Jesus. And may the Spirit of God give you the strength, courage, and wisdom to know what it takes to be a true friend to yourself and to others. Amen? Amen. I'll see y'all next week.